Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's session on reinventing the workplace. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes while everyone joins the call. So to get us started and thinking about the topics we're going to talk about, I'm going to launch a couple of polls, and it'd be great if you could answer the questions for us. There will be a Q&A at the end, so use the Zoom functionality at the bottom, and we will get to those questions at the end. We're also recording this session, so we'll be sending a link out later on this afternoon. Great, I think we are ready to start going. So I'll introduce Emily, and she's going to chair today's session.
Thanks, Gemma. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to everyone for answering the poll. We'll leave those up for a few minutes to let people fill them in. I'm Emily Hill, CEO of Ghyston, and we put together this panel to discuss how the office has changed during lockdown and what the longer-term implications are for how we work. There's lots to discuss, but before we begin, it would be great if the panel could introduce themselves, please, and tell us your biggest lesson that you've learned during lockdown. Mark, would you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, sure. So Mark Taylor, I'm the Managing Director of Korus IT. Our biggest lesson, I think it's just actually the resilience and the impressiveness of staff, really, both individually and collectively. The transition from office environment to suddenly being at home was obviously always lined up with potentially interesting challenges, but actually it's not been as challenging as we thought it might be. So just I think the resilience of staff individually and collectively has been very impressive.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Mark. Sharon, would you like to go next?
Morning, I'm Sharon Oad, co-founder of Signature Recruitment and director for the Bristol office. I have three big lessons that I've learned thus far. So the importance of communication and engagement from the leadership team and how far that can take a group of people. That working from home is possible, even in sectors and organisations that have been very resilient to that for a long time. And the third one is the opening debate around the importance of face-to-face communication.
Great, yeah, no, we'll probably come on to that later in the session. Thanks, Sharon. Bridget, can I ask you to go next?
Hi, I'm Bridget. I'm the Tech Director at the Institute of Physics Publishing. Of course, it's about the people. It's about putting people first and making sure that you've got the right kinds of mechanisms for dealing with the kinds of issues that arise, and that you've got the right conversations going with your staff to tackle those situations. The other thing that I certainly felt as a tech director is all eyes on tech for this period of time, and that certainly put a lot of pressure on myself and my team, but it also gave us a massive opportunity to shine, and that's been really rewarding, actually.
That's great. And last but not least, Chris.
Maden in Bath. Well, the first lesson I learned, of course, was that I'm royally challenged, and if I try and transmit video, everything just goes wrong on these calls, which is why you can't see my face. But yeah, it's all about the people. I too have been just really impressed by how our team adapted to this kind of instantaneously. But I think the biggest lesson I've learned is actually how much I miss physical human contact. And that's coming from an extreme introvert. So who normally tries to get away from people as much as possible. But actually after 2 weeks, I was really missing human contact. And on Friday in the office, I went in and there were 6 other people there who all had to go in for different reasons, and it wasn't orchestrated. And the elation of being with other people was really palpable. And I, to an extent that I really didn't expect, and surprised me.
Great, thanks, Chris. Well, actually, looking at the poll that everyone sort of filled in on their way in, it seems like people generally think team morale has stayed about the same during lockdown. And I think when we were discussing the other day as a group how this had affected our culture, we sort of agreed that at the moment it was still strong. But Chris, I wonder, do you think we can keep our sort of morale and culture strong if people remain working from home?
And our team morale has stayed the same. Obviously, Maden has 90 employees, and across the spectrum of 90 employees, this has affected people in different ways. There are those who are genuinely isolated, and that comes with its own issues. There are those who are have large families and are trying to work at home with children, and that has its own challenges. So you can't really kind of answer the question for a whole group of people who have got individual, circumstances. But certainly, we've put a lot in place to keep morale up. We have breakfast meetings. We have the Maden kitchen hangout, which anyone can go in during the day just to have a chat with people as if it was around the coffee machine. We have Maden at the pub after work, so people can go in and all have a drink online together. We've had pub quizzes, etc. So we've really tried to kind of maintain the office culture as much as you can online.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We've done similar things at Ghyston. I wonder, Mark, do you think we can truly sort of replicate that water cooler chat sort of scenario digitally?
Yeah, I hope so. Well, I think we'll have to see long term. I certainly echo what Chris has said, and yourself. I think we've done a lot of those things and tried to extend that culture into the circumstances we will find ourselves in. Culture, as it sounds like for other panelists here today in the company, is an important thing for us. So we recognise that was probably going to be one of the bigger challenges, and it has been so. We had an example of a fairly new member of staff who joined us just before lockdown, who actually informed us fairly recently that he's expecting his first child later in the year. And I think, although it was possible to overread into the situation, we did end up having a little bit of a conversation about how we discovered that, how would we have done that if we'd all been in the office, would it have been any different? And, what do we need to think about in terms of how we try and get some of those pieces that perhaps we're thinking are starting to slip or not be as rigid with the technology we have now, because it certainly enabled a lot, but does it enable the full extent of everything you get when you're all in an office? I think perhaps not just yet.
Yeah, I think we're all going from a running start, so we all know each other. Most people know each other already, but when it comes to onboarding new staff, it seems around half the people do have a plan for remote onboarding, but slightly more than half. Sharon, what do you think? There must be other challenges that come with remote onboarding of staff as we start to take on new hires?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to move the recruitment process itself online, people are fairly comfortable with, and it's not particularly new in a lot of organisations to do an interview through a video chat, but remote onboarding for some has been incredibly challenging and definitely out of their comfort zone. I mean, there's key things to consider. Having a plan to start with is essential, and I would advise that whether you're doing it remotely or in the office, and that should be a structured 12-week plan, and including things not just around learning the processes and the functionality of the job, but also having a structured plan to embed people into your company culture. So to have at least 6 touch points within the business. So aside from IT to get you up and running, your line manager to review one-to-ones, a peer within your team, also to make sure that there are peers across the wider business who are able to have those water cooler conversations with you. So it's a bit more of a formal arrangement, but it's really important for not just the individual joining and onboarding, but also for the company itself to maintain their culture as they add new people into the organisation.
That's great advice. Thanks, Sharon. And Bridget, do you think, like, if we're thinking about onboarding new staff, recruiting new staff, does the kind of new way of perhaps sort of more remote or hybrid working raise questions about what locality those people should be at, sort of maybe the structure of the business?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've opened our eyes to, actually, and whilst we've been working with remote teams for quite a long time, I don't think we would have considered before lockdown recruiting into different localities, but actually now we are. And in fact, we've just brought somebody new into our team who's based in China. And we have an office in China, but I don't think that would have been at the forefront of our minds that that would have been a sensible thing to do. And actually it's a fantastic thing to do, because it now means that we've got a footprint in one of our key markets, we've got a technical person that can help us with local issues, and actually they're working on a level playing field with everybody else right now. And the onboarding process has been a bit more challenging. We've had to think about more things, and I dare say for that individual it's been an unusual experience, but it's everybody's experience right now, so why not take advantage of that?
Yeah, and I wonder, Mark, are you seeing people investing more in different tools and technologies as they move out of sort of panic mode, just get it all working, and into more of a longer term view on remote working?
Yeah, I think obviously the transition to cloud has been going on for a number of years now. So I think, depending on an individual organization's progression along that journey, the experience might have been a little bit different for us. And, a good number of our clients are slightly more advanced. It was literally, no difference at all. Every aspect of what we do technically, from phone system through to the solutions, through to client access, everything is completely cloud-based. So, and I actually had a really good example of that yesterday, because we had a major power cut here in Portishead yesterday, and the office lost power for an extended time. Which I knew because we had one member of staff in downstairs, and he let me know by text nice and early in the morning that the power was out. But other than that, we actually had no impact whatsoever. Nobody noticed. The phones, everything else was working 100% normally. So I think, the technology unquestionably supports that ability to work remotely. That's not the question anymore. I think it's more a question of, now we're getting into those questions of refinement, optimization, where the tweaks and the small improvements we can make to just make it more suitable for the kinds of things that, as Bridget just highlighted, that are now available to us as opportunities, employing people in different countries, etc., etc.
I mean, I suppose employing people, having that wider kind of view on employment, you could find someone anywhere. That must impact your role as a recruiter, Sharon. I don't know if you've seen anything there already, or.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Mark said, that debate is definitely opening up. And as Bridget's found, it's absolutely possible when you're working remotely to hire from anywhere in the world. And there's definitely opportunities to that. But as COVID starts to settle down and this the face-to-face debate continues, there may well be a rebound on that, whereby people say, actually, I do need people who are within commutable distance to the office, say a day a week, for example. So there still is some resilience to that, but it's going to be very interesting to see how different company cultures manage to cope with that and how they adjust.
Chris, I think your team used to be mostly office based, or maybe entirely office based. How do you see the sort of hybrid model working for Maden?
I think first of all, we're in the software industry, and we probably have more metrics to measure productivity than any other industry, and yet actually measuring productivity is actually very difficult, and it's something that we've struggled with for quite a long time. And so you kind of measure it by feel, and despite all of the metrics, and the general sense of opinion was that when we went onto home working, we dropped in productivity a bit, and probably by around 10%. And that's kind of crept up. So if you asked our teams now where they thought productivity was at, they would say it's probably equal to where it was at in the office. And that's good. And I think the lesson we've learned is that the productivity is fine if we're all in the office and fine if we're all working at home. But when you get this mixture of working at home and in the office, we don't think productivity will be as high. There is the kind of culture in the office of teams working together, and the people at home are kind of left out. We have had quite a few people working at home for some time, and it's been clear that the ones at home have been kind of slightly isolated. And what's actually happened during this period is it's put them all on an equal playing field with everybody else. So we're still kind of learning lots of lessons about that, but we are really struggling with how we would make a hybrid model work and maintain the productivity we've got at the moment.
Yeah, it's a challenge certainly that we're finding at Ghyston as well. So how do we see that going into the future? What other challenges, Bridget, do you think the sort of hybrid working model brings?
I think the main things that are starting to emerge for us, apart from the productivity angle, which actually I will say something about because I think it is an issue for us in an organisation where we have different cultures for different parts of the organisation, and home working and this kind of situation suits some parts of the business really well. Actually, their productivity has gone up. But I think tech working, which is an intensely collaborative and social activity, we are finding parts of that quite difficult. Some of it's okay, and the technology is amazing, but the kind of cohesion of our unit is quite difficult to maintain. And I think what we're starting to realise is that as an organisation, we have become very reliant on the kind of office interactions. So the casual conversation that makes you pick up on something that you didn't know about, that triggers a conversation that then suddenly becomes quite important. And that's starting to get lost. So how do you replace that? And that's not about water cooler conversations. That's actually about really people really understanding their mission and their purpose and what they're there to do, and being able to autonomously take decisions about that in isolation from the mothership. And we've realised that we're not cohesive enough. We don't have a strong enough culture to hold that up into the future. So we're going to have to start to do some things to repair some of that, and that's a challenge actually for organisations. That's really thinking about your culture and empowering all individuals to be able to take decisions at the right levels, and them know that those decisions are the right things to do because they're in isolation of all of this other stuff that's going on, and they can't see it and touch it and feel it. So I think that's our main challenge going forward.
And that's a big one.
It's a big one. It's a really big one. But I think once we've identified it, we're really starting to think about that now. Think about what does that look like for our organisation.
Yeah. And once you've identified it, you can put something in place to move forward and make the changes.
Yeah.
So you said that there were also some productivity challenges, Bridget. Did you want to touch on those?
Yeah, it's really difficult to put your finger on it, and it's absolutely right to say that we measure everything, but productivity is very difficult to measure. One of the things that I believe demonstrates not necessarily productivity, but it demonstrates that you have an effective organisation is I want to say happiness, but maybe happiness isn't quite the right word, but at least engagement of the people that are within that organisation. If they are engaged and you know that they're engaged, then you're probably on the right lines for them to be really productive. And I think under these circumstances, happiness in general is slipping away a little bit because this is hard. This is really hard on people. And it's hard to concentrate. And I think a lot of people are starting to show the stress of, this level of having to concentrate really, really hard all of the time and deal with all of the other stuff that's going on in people's lives, which is incredibly stressful, actually. So with that starting to slip away a little bit, I think, we're just starting to see those kind of high levels of concentration that are required sometimes particularly in tech work to be quite difficult to sustain. And sustainability is part of the game here. We know this is going to go on for a long time, so how are we going to get work to be sustainable for everybody? And I don't have a lot of answers about that, but I do believe that we're going to have to face that as a challenge and really think about whether or not we can make people work at the same pace that they did before under these circumstances.
Yeah, I think definitely feels like people have been able to accommodate each other whilst in crisis mode. Everyone's just pulling together, but is it sustainable? Mark, do you have any views on that?
I recognise all the challenges, that's for sure. I think we're starting to look and have looked in the past actually at things around I don't know if there's something called intent-based leadership, and there's a few aspects like that where, again, we're trying to impart that ability, as Bridget alluded to, for individuals to actually be empowered and fully enabled to make decisions that are appropriate to them. So I think, you know, those, as Bridget said, there are definitely things we need to look at there. I think, you know, is one of the concerns I have is that sense of that team cohesion that's been talked about. We're certainly seeing that. I think we have lots of those techies and they're doing lots of things, and actually there was that spike of actually getting on with it and doing some really good stuff. It's very difficult at the moment, I think, to make a good judgment call on whether some of the perhaps downside we're seeing to productivity and things is actually a sustained downturn, or is it more a function of again, as has been alluded to, are people just getting a little bit kind of tired of the general circumstance at the moment, and therefore that's impacting their mental health and everybody's feeling a bit flatter? Or is this a sustained issue because of adjustments we need to make to work culture and how we improve that? Reality, as with everything, is it's probably a little bit of everything, and we're going to have to tweak a lot of little cogs in little ways to try and get everything to where it works for everyone. But yeah, I think similar challenges. I think we're certainly looking for ways to try and improve those things and keep everybody on a nice even keel.
Great, thanks. And Sharon, you know, we've talked about the opportunity to sort of decentralize a business because of the sort of remote working. Are there any other opportunities you think the hybrid working situation really brings to businesses?
Yeah, I mean, as well as opening up the flexibility to acquire talent, which pre-COVID, I think most people that were hiring recognised that it wasn't straightforward with the market essentially being in full employment. I think the consequences of that and the flexibility that offers are definitely an opportunity to be seized. I think the other piece in there is around how the culture then adapts around that. So we're all very used to pre-COVID turning up to a workplace and the physicality of the collection of people in the building being the kind of fundamentals of the culture and how we communicate face to face. I think, as Bridget says, there's lots of challenges to come around the culture piece as we move forwards. There's also opportunities there as to how we reshape that for the future. And you know, we've got various phases here. We've come out of the crisis phase, but we've still got a marathon. You know, as this pandemic sits alongside our lives for months, if not, you know, a year, 2 years, we've got this transition piece, and then after that we've got an opportunity to shape how we want working life to look like thereafter. But I think awareness of the strain that this is putting on people's mental health, the impact that has on productivity, and the lack of connection that some people may be feeling, especially if they're, you know, in a one-bed flat on their own, and they're working from home means at the end of their bed. Awareness of people's different personal circumstances, those that are having to homeschool several children alongside full-time work expectations. There's some incredibly challenging individual situations at the moment. So the empathetic approach to leadership, I think, is more important than ever, and recognizing that everyone is an individual and to treat them accordingly.
Yeah, I think that those are really good points, Sharon. We've actually had a really relevant question come in that Gemma's just pinging over to me. Or maybe I could just... so basically someone's saying they're working from home and that's actually working out much better for them. They're more productive and it's fitting in really well for them, but the rate of change in their organisation sort of culturally is very slow, and they're wondering if the panelists have any advice on how they can I guess persuade their employers to allow them to continue working from home longer term. I don't know if anyone wants to jump in there. Thanks, Sharon.
I'm happy to take that. I would absolutely have the conversation with not just your line manager, but also with HR or at director level, depending on the size and shape of your organisation and where those decision makers sit. And not necessarily initially to ask to work from home, but more of an open conversation initially to ask whether or not this is being considered long term, what the company views are, what they see as being the challenges beyond just your own personal circumstances, and then to suggest that actually this is something that you've thought about, you've considered your productivity as well as your own well-being, and that you do see a way of this working forward. So you'd really like to have that opportunity.
Thanks, Sharon. Bridget?
And I'd be having the conversation with them about what are they thinking about how they want to exploit the opportunity going forward as an organisation. Because if that individual has noticed that they're working better and they're happier and they're contributing more, then what other individuals in the organisation, your organisation, are feeling the same? And I think that's a question that organisations should be asking themselves, because this is a massive opportunity, right, to make employees more engaged and loyal and have a better work experience. So why would an employer not want to recognise that and seize it? So I think that's a good starting point for that conversation, to say, I'm feeling like I'm a better employee. How can we take this forward?
Yeah, and I think it's true that a lot of large organisations have had to, have an enormously fast rate of change to get everyone mobilised to work from home, so different to what they would normally be able to enact. And so it's the perfect time to try and have those conversations and sort of start more change in that kind of area. Mark, were you unmuting to add?
I was just going to say, obviously, others have already said it's difficult to perhaps drive it, but I'm sure others have here by the sounds of it. We've run surveys for staff because obviously we want to find out what staff opinion is. So I was going to say, certainly I would hope that most organisations are thinking about doing that, because hopefully they've seen that opportunity that Bridget's referred to. Take those opportunities, fill those in. Don't be shy about getting down the benefits that you've been able to drive out of this change yourself, because certainly in terms of the feedback we've had on surveys so far, people have really given us some solid information. They haven't just given like a score out of 10 and gone move on. They've given us some solid worded feedback on what's worked for them, what doesn't. We've asked about what would improve it. So I think anything you can jump on to take advantage of like that and give that feedback is going to help, because as has been said, there's definite opportunity here. It isn't just a negative story by any means.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Mark. Sharon, earlier you sort of touched on sort of the mental health of employees, and that's something we discussed as a group last week as well. Chris, what's your view on that? Do you think we're sort of heading towards a mental health crisis?
In digital healthcare, and our main area of work at the moment is mental health. So we have to keep our finger on the pulse with this. And what we have to remember, just from a macro point of view, we now have probably 65,000 families who are bereaved and have not been able to attend funerals or mourn their loved ones, not just from COVID, but from all of the other conditions that people have not been attending hospital for, that they could have otherwise been treated. So there's going to be a lot of kind of guilt and regrets around that. There is a general COVID fear, which I'm becoming more and more aware of. Being isolated, as we have been, you kind of get a view sometimes that everybody's thinking the same way you are, and they're not. And what I'm becoming aware of is that there are some people who are actually terrified of COVID, and there are other people who actually don't care and are cramming into pubs on Saturday, as if there's nothing happening at all. We'll be aware that domestic abuse rates have gone through the roof. The divorce rate is really up. Homelessness has increased as families have fallen apart. There are people whose health has declined because they've not been able to get the healthcare they wanted during the pandemic period. And that's before we even touch on the economic impact, with 3 million unemployed at the moment, and that's only going to rise as we get to as the months kind of unfold. And then there's the impact on young people, which is a whole other can of worms, and on their education, which has been severely disrupted in lots of cases. You add all of that together, and it's not surprising that all the studies are showing that we have a mental health tsunami coming over the horizon. As an organisation, we have to prepare for that, and we and we're doing so. But interestingly, when the lockdown first started, referral rates into mental health services actually dropped by half, as they did for all health services, because people were actually afraid to go to anywhere that had kind of a healthcare label. That's starting to come up now, and just like a tsunami, the wave goes out before it comes back in again. So as a society, we are expecting a huge mental health tsunami. At the micro level, all of those things that I just mentioned could be affecting one or more of your employees. And we have to remember that all our employees are individuals, and they all have their particular circumstances. It's true that some are actually much happier in the current environment. That's certainly the case with us. They are happier and more productive working at home, and we've got to deal with that. There are others who are really struggling. Personally, my heart sinks every morning when I look at my diary and see that I've just got a whole series of Zoom calls. Nothing personal, Emily. The first one of the day is usually okay, and then I start flagging on the third or fourth. As I say, that's becoming quite difficult for some people as well. And it's what we've got to do is more and more is treat people as individuals, and actually tailor the work going forward to individual circumstances as much as we can do. I think as an organisation we're quite good at that, but as this kind of unfolds, it becomes clear that we're going to have to do more.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, there's a lot of serious stuff going on that's bound to affect employees, if not directly, indirectly through people they know. Bridget, do you have advice for managers on how to sort of maybe identify and help protect employees against mental health issues?
One thing, we had a seminar. We had someone come in and give us a seminar, Nick Ghyston, and it was absolutely brilliant actually a few weeks ago. And one of the pieces of advice that he gave us, which actually I thought was brilliant, and I hadn't thought about it before, was actually it's not our responsibility to fix it. And that is actually a really important thing to remember as managers, because actually it's quite overwhelming. I mean, just listening to what Chris has said, that's a lot for people to take on, just knowing that that's out there. And we can't fix it all, but we can listen. We can be empathetic, as Sharon said, and we can talk to people about what measures we can help put in place to help support them in the workplace. And I think that is a really positive conversation to be able to have with people. I think if we do try and take on everybody's mental health problems, we're all going to go under. So I guess that would be one piece of advice that I would pass on, which is listen, make sure that you're open and aware and trying to put measures in place, but don't try and fix everything, because you'll take yourself down too, and that's not going to help anybody. That's the best advice I've got so far. I mean, it is terrifying listening to that going forward. And I guess we just got to try and stay strong and try and stay positive and look out for one another.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Bridget.
Look after ourselves as well, actually. Take a bit of time to look after yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I suppose as we're bringing, a lot of our businesses that we work with have furloughed many of their staff, and as we're sort of bringing those back in, as our clients bring those back in, it's important to be aware of how that might affect those employees. I wonder, Sharon, if you've got any advice for that kind of situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think reboarding employees that have been out of the business for weeks or months, it definitely hasn't been a holiday for a lot of people. It's been incredibly stressful. There's been nervousness about whether or not there will be a job for them to return to. So that on top of kind of COVID anxiety can be very difficult. So I think to onboard those employees as if they're coming in again for the first time, and just taking your time to reconnect with people. Don't make assumptions about their capabilities. within their job. The devil's in the detail. Set clear expectations and check in regularly like you would for a new starter. So again, going back to that initial 12-week plan, just to make sure people are steady. I think Bridget's points on the mental health piece are absolutely spot on, and I just reiterate for team leaders, middle managers and directors, it's really important to put your oxygen mask on you first, and just check in and make sure that you're in a good place to lead and be balanced, to be able to have those lines in place where you are listening, you're empathetic, you're supportive, but you're also not the solution provider. You're there to enable and equip and support with that. But we're not trained mental health professionals. There are people that are, and it's making sure that that's available to the right people who need it at the right time.
Thanks, Sharon. Yeah, yeah, I think that's all very true. And Mark, I wonder if you've got any advice to managers and leaders about how they can look after their own well-being.
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a tricky question there.
Sorry.
I think, you know, the advice given is good. You know, that taking time for yourself, it is critical, because you know, it's easy sometimes. I know I've certainly been there myself over the years, to kind of think, you know, you have to put the brave face on and be the person with the mask who just is flawless in the face of all of it, kind of go away and cry in the corner afterwards. But you know, and I think, you know, what we've all recognized and talked about here is that what's happening right now is that over the last few years we've had an improving mental health awareness story in this country, and probably globally, hopefully, and that's been great to see. I think what we've suddenly seen now, or certainly what we're going to see, is there's going to be a sharp upturn in the acceleration of recognizing that story, because obviously the scale of what we're all facing is very different. Yeah, and again, going back to positives, hopefully that some positives will come out of that. We will be able to accelerate that story and all do better in terms of mental health awareness. That's the good thing. I guess like I said, the challenging part is, and as we've already said here, is to start with yourself, because if you do that whole brave face thing, it'll crack at some point, and you'll realize you're just pretending. So yeah, start with yourself. Don't try and fix everything, and just echo the advice already given. Really, it's spot on.
Thank you. We're coming to the end of the sort of planned questions. So if anyone who's watching today has any questions that they'd like me to put to the panel, please send them through now.
Can I ask a question of Sharon, which occurred to me a minute ago when you were talking about changing profile of work as we go forward? Do you think we're likely to see more sort of flexible and agile working as the norm going forward? So people looking for more part-time workers, people working more unusual hours. Do you think that's going to become more formal and start to come through in recruitment practices?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've all talked about monitoring work levels, having dashboards, looking at KPIs, etc. I think that perhaps is going to challenge how managers view productivity. What I mean by that is that it'll be measured by results. Therefore, it'll absolutely be a case where you hire someone for 4 hours a week because there's a piece of work that needs to be delivered every week. I also think that we've all proved that you can trust employees to work when you can't see them. And that's been an incredible breakthrough for the UK, who's been so resilient for that, especially in certain pockets of industry. So I absolutely think that will continue to move forwards, which is wonderful. I also think that there'll be further opportunities there to look at how certain types of work need to be done collaboratively. Therefore, you need a shared space, and that might not any longer be the traditional office space that we all have our signs above. It might well be that office space flexibility increases further again, and then the work that can be done separately is done at home. So actually the structures of our weeks and months and the ebbs and flows that we work through will have to be evaluated and adjusted to cope with this really tricky in-between space where we have people working from home and in the office, which we've all talked about, seems to be the biggest challenge as we move forwards. Everyone working from home it's been an incredible response, and on the whole productivity is where it should be, if not higher in some pockets. However, this kind of transition into an in-between phase, that's the piece that now needs more thought moving forwards.
Yeah, I'm secretly hoping that this is an opportunity for women to find better quality work, because there'll be more opportunities for work to fit in around family life, which has traditionally been quite difficult for women. So I'm really hoping we see an opening up of that kind of traditional 9 to 5, you have to be in the office.
Absolutely, you and me both. And those with responsibilities, whatever shape family that they have, to be able to honour and respect your family life as much as you do your work life, rather than having this constant guilt and something's always going to be secondary, and not having to have that constant conflict, I think will be a revolution, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it unfold.
Yeah, that is definitely a positive that will hopefully come out of this, Sharon. And we have had a few questions in as well. There's a question on thought. Does anyone have any thoughts on changes to office facilities? So you touched on this just now, Sharon. Will we have smaller desks so that we can fit more people in because they're not coming in often, or hot desking, meeting rooms, more leisure space? Mark, do you have any sort of thoughts on how the office space sort of might change?
Yeah, I think we are certainly expecting changes, and I'm not sure we're entirely clear quite what that's going to be just yet. I think that, for instance, again, we've alluded to the fact technology, which we haven't really, it's not really a subject for today, I guess, into the technology of how that kind of flexible solution that we now all have access to, which needs some key pieces in place, security being probably the primary one. But once you've kind of got that box ticked, we know the technology supports working from anywhere today pretty much. I certainly think, we've already looked at things like office space and gone, well, we're certainly not going to need this volume of space in future, are we? So what does that look like? Because even that getting together, it doesn't necessarily need to be here. It can be pretty much anywhere within the right sort of set of sub-conditions. So yeah, definitely some changes apart from the basics of desk layouts, which again, I'm sure we're all revising in our own time. From our perspective, I certainly say that we're certainly not feeling any rush to get back to the office. It works. We are working. Although we've got all those challenges we've discussed already today, and we've got individuals that are working, those what we would have considered, well, how's that going to work? Because an individual starts work at 3 PM and finishes at whatever time at night. But I think actually, obviously, what we're actually seeing really clearly, and it can't be argued anymore, is it's role dependent. It's completely role dependent. Clearly, if you have somebody who's working, as we do, we have people who work shifts and to cover a help desk operation, that has a certain rigidity to it that's quite hard to be overly flexible with. Whereas actually other roles, 100%, we can be infinitely more flexible than perhaps we would have hoped. And we've tried to be flexible in the past, but I think this enforced awakening to what can be done is a good thing. Certainly don't have any issues with it. It's been great to see. So yeah, all kinds of things opening up. Certainly we're reviewing spaces. As I say, customers, I think I mentioned at the start, customers have started to send me photographs of their office and how they're thinking about changing things and how the technology can support a different working layout. So lots of change coming, that's for sure, in terms of physical layout of offices and how we get together and how we collaborate, I think.
Yeah, I think certainly that's true for us as well, and we'll be consulting all of our staff and finding out what their views are. They usually have some good ideas as to how we should rearrange things and take into account people's different preferences for home working or hybrid working. There's a question come in about on the chat about productivity. Well, should we be measuring productivity, or should we switch to measuring happiness as an indicator of success, or at least adding it to our set of measures? Does anyone have any sort of views on that, or is anyone already measuring that as one of their sort of key indicators?
Hi, Emily. I'm happy to have a go at that. I think there's a lot of merit in the question and the proposed answer. I think we've been measuring productivity for years, as I said, and have never really cracked it. And actually, the biggest measure, if you like, of when we think productivity is at its highest is when morale is at its highest. And if everybody is happy and working, there generally is a sense that they're also being productive. And although that is really difficult to quantify, I'm becoming of increasingly the view that morale and productivity are very closely linked. And yeah, what was the second part of the question again? You're on mute, Emily.
Thank you. Should we be adding the happiness index to our sort of key performance indicators?
So I guess we, and probably other organisations do that already. So we're always surveying our staff. We've literally just done a staff survey, which we do twice a year, which looks at a whole range of factors about, workplace. I mean, happiness is probably not the wrong word, but in terms of, how engaged and fulfilled and, and happy our staff are with various aspects of the business. And we take that temperature twice a year, and we've been tracking it for about 7 years now. So we already have a kind of measure of that. I also run a temperature panel every 2 months where we take the temperature of the business, and that's anyone can turn up to the temperature panel, and we literally just go through the entire business, really exploring how we feel with every aspect of the business, whether it's capacity in software development or whether we feel our marketing is right with another product or whatever. We just cover the whole thing. So we're always constantly sort of taking those measurements and then acting on the results of them, which I think is also important to show that you are not just measuring it, but you're actually doing something, where there's a sort of negative sentiment in the air.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's a nice idea with there, and lots of nods around the panel. So I think we're all keen on that and agree that that's really important. There's just a final question. I think maybe Sharon, this would be a good one for you. Are employers now obliged to honour all home working requests?
So I will start with a disclaimer. I'm not CIPD qualified, and I'm not a qualified lawyer either. So I can't answer that without checking the law. I think my personal view is irrelevant of what the law says. I think there will be a strong movement to suggest that all has to be considered now, especially if there is sufficient evidence to suggest that there is no detriment to the performance of that person in that role. So I think there will be an awful lot of conversations happening right now about the future of the workspace and where things need to lie. What the law says, however, I don't know, but irrelevant of that, I think there needs to be an open conversation, and there'll be enough cultural pressure to make sure that does happen. And if it's not happening, create the culture pressure. That would be my advice.
I just jump in. I was going to say I'm not either of those things either, so I echo the disclaimer. But my understanding historically, obviously, is that the law kind of says obviously all businesses have to reasonably consider such requests, and that's been the case for a little while now. And I think what's interesting about where we find ourselves is obviously I think businesses in the past might have looked at it, given the situational role, and gone, can't really see that working from home. And then, or given that flexibility or whatever it is that's been asked for. And I think one of the interesting places we will find ourselves in now is that actually it's going to be really hard to say that doesn't work, because what have we been doing for the last 4 months or whatever it is, So I think there's a very interesting, as Sharon said, I think the challenging question should be asked anyway, but I think actually all businesses are going to be forced to look a little more robustly at those questions now, because it's not going to be as easy to say, no, that's not possible, because we've been doing it. So in the main, again, there's always going to be those rules and exceptions. We all know that's life. But actually, yeah, we've been living that world for several months now. So difficult to deny it's possible.
Yeah, Bridget.
I was just going to add to that. Actually, one thing that I've started to hear now, and I think we should all be aware of it, is the hybrid model. So I've heard people saying, oh, well, it all works when we're all at home, and it all works when we're all in the office, but it won't work if some people are at home and some people are in the office. And now that might be true, or it might be more difficult, but I still think that is the next level of conversation that we have to have, which is how do we make it work in that hybrid way, because I think that's absolutely going to happen, because we are going to get people who are going to want to work from home, and a lot of people are going to want to come back into the office. So you're definitely going to get split teams, and that's going to be more challenging, but it's another challenge. And I think we have to think about how we make that work, not just assume, oh no, now you can't work from home because we've got some people back in the office. So there's multiple layers to that conversation going forward.
I think
I
that's
agree.
true.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, our first approach to that is not to split the teams, but to actually have whole teams working at home, and then whole teams in the office, but kind of rotate the teams on home working and not home working, to try and alleviate the problem of the split team working, which we do see as a genuine issue.
Or make everybody dial in is the other thing. Even if you're in the office, treat it as if this is just another remote location, is another way of thinking about that same solution.
Yeah, that's certainly how I've heard of it working for other businesses. This has been great. We've unfortunately run out of time, but thank you, Mark, Sharon, Bridget and Chris, for your contributions and your time this morning. And I hope everyone's taken something away from this discussion. And maybe we need to get together again in 6 months' time and discuss how that hybrid model is working out for us. But for now, we'll say goodbye. And Gemma, I think we'll be sending around some information following the panel event. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.